Hello, and welcome to the lore of Braunhaven. I'm going to be doing a series that is concerning the Astral Bazaar, and the reason for that is the upcoming or forthcoming book for Castles and Crusades and for Old School Essentials, the Crucible of a Dead God adventure for levels 4 through 6. And this will be really heavily centered around the Astral Bazaar, which floats in the Astral Sea on the petrified corpse of a dead god. And a lot of philosophical questions will be posed, and there won't necessarily be any answers to those questions. One question could be: Is it possible for a god to really die? Um, that question may actually be somewhat answered. I don't believe that gods ever actually truly die. They may go into a deep hibernation for untold eons before rumbling back to life. And so that's kind of the centerpiece of this upcoming adventure, but we can't really discuss the Astral Bazaar, which is ruled by the Astral Elves, without first kind of looking into what makes the elves such a tragic species or race, and how did they come to these astral elves? How did they come to rule the Astral Bazaar as such? And so, getting into the history of the elves, the elves are commonly referred to as the first peoples, and they are known to be the first ones to have stepped into the known world. And it is believed that the old god Sinaz was the creator of all elven kind, as well as all of the forests and wild places of the known world, as that is his domain. That is what he does. He is the god of forests, woodland creatures, and of course, elves. What isn't known by the commoner in the Braunhaven campaign setting is that this didn't happen on the known world. He actually created the forests and the proto elves or the gray elves. Most commoners refer to them as the Fey elves, which is kind of a misnomer because all elves are of a Fey ancestry. But um, you could say that Sinaz actually created the entire plane of the Fey realm, just as Octus, kind of copying him, created the Shadow realm, which is kind of an opposite or a mirror image of the Fey realm, and is the first place where the souls of the dead congregate before moving on to whatever just reward they get, either in the celestial palace, if they are of a if they are deemed to be of a higher calling nature, or down into the nine hells, or worse, thrown into the abyss if they are of a unworthy nature. And it's really that time that they exist in the shadow realm that that kind of eliminates their past history. It cleanses the soul. They are free of memories of their past life usually once they move on. So this is the Sinaz created the Fey realm and the first peoples, who are the Grey Elves, and he instilled in them an ability to essentially rule themselves. Sinaz, being an old god, he had the creation process down, but the old gods are very fickle, and he didn't have much desire to directly interact with his creations. He sat and wanted to watch them from afar. Um, he was kind of ADHD. You know, Anybody who paints miniatures knows exactly what this is like. He paints a couple and then leaves, puts them on the shelf, and he has a bunch of unfinished minis that he goes on to do another hobby. Who knows what that hobby is? He's a god. It could be anything. Maybe it was destroying another realm or creating a different set of people. Who knows? He might have created the platypus for all we know. But he sat back and he didn't have a whole lot of interaction with the Fey Elves. And the Fey Elves, they were instilled with an ability where they are of dual personality. And so any Fey Elf or Grey Elf that is created actually has two classes and two sets of dispositions. But they don't lose memory. So at the beginning of every day, they can choose which one they want to be. And these dispositions are always of opposing alignment. So you might have, as a very hardcore example, usually they're chaotic. So you might have a one personality being chaotic good and the other personality being chaotic evil. And one personality might be a fighter and the other personality might be an illusionist. So they have these at the start of each day. They can choose which personality they are. Their eyes actually change color from an all white with no pupil to an all black with no pupil, depending on which personality they have chosen. And this ability is really what is at the core of how things are ruled in the Fey realm. Their their laws and their customs are very exact and literal. And it is often said that if you attract the attention of the Fae, that you are never going to be alone, and it is not a good thing. It is not. It is not wise to attract the attention of the Fae because you never know how they are going to act. You never know what direction their whims will travel. If they are of one disposition, one day they may help you. They might give you boons or gifts. They might play little pranks on you because they think that it's funny, but they're not harmful. If they're of the other disposition, your firstborn child might disappear, or their pranks may become deadly or life altering. Your house might burn to the ground. You may go into your root cellar and discover that all of your food is suddenly spoiled, even though it was only harvested yesterday. These kinds of things. And the Fey realm is ruled by the Seelie and the Unseelie courts. And often these Fey elves are members of both. It just depends on which disposition they have chosen that particular day. So things in the Fey realm are very, while they are exact and literal as far as how they treat things, they to the mortals that have actually been to the Fey realm, things seem rather mercurial because you could be talking to one of the Fey elves one day and he is your friend, and on the next day he is leading a war party against you or trailing you and causing you misdeeds. And so the Fey realm existed this way for eons. In what is known as the Reckoning, and nobody knows why or who initially coined that phrase, although there will be hints given in Crucible of a Dead God as to what the reckoning was. But the literal sense of what it was is that the planes of existence touched, and in some cases later collided. And nobody knows how long this event lasted, but one of the first events that occurred was that the Fey realm came into brief contact, not really a crash, but more of a fender bender, slight glance with the abyss. And it was so brief that they were lucky in that they didn't have more contact than they did. And the reality of this is that only a few of the more dangerous demons of the abyss took note, and the most important of them was the demon goddess Arachnia. She is the goddess of spiders, and she was able to transfer herself physically from the Fey realm, or excuse me, from the abyss to the Fey realm. And some of the Fey elves at this time, the Fey elves had a second generation had been created by Sinaz. This second generation, who would later become the High Elves, they did not have the ability of dual personality or any kind of duality to their disposition. He Sinaz felt that perhaps he had gone a little too far, and he wanted to create a little more stability. And these new high elves, the second generation, the Fey elves looked upon them as children. They were new to the world or to existence as a whole, and there was a sense of needing to guide them. Well, this sense of needing to guide them and this sense of parenthood and kinship over the high elves quickly dissipated with the Fey elves, because with Arachnia coming to the Fey realm, some of the Fey elves decided, Sinaz is very despondent. He doesn't interact with his children, and yet here's Arachnia, and spiders are a part of the natural world, and so they splintered. And some of them started to worship Arachnia, and this was a long and slow, insidious process that eventually led them to go into the dark recesses of the Fey realm, and started to more and more give themselves over to Arachnia. And this was considered an abomination by most of the High Elves. This was a very small minority at that time. And so, being finding this intolerable, there was a large civil war that suddenly erupted between the High Elves and what is now the Dark Elves. For their part, the Fey Elves, they kind of at first ignored them, thinking that it was nothing but a fight between petulant children. This civil war erupted across the Fey realm, and so eventually, as it got more and more vicious, the Fey elves had no choice but to get involved. And the weird thing about it is that the Fey elves took up on both sides because of the duality of their nature. And eventually, things fought to a standstill, thanks in a lot of cases because of Arachnia's demonic armies and the insidious nature of demonic possession. And so the Fey elves then decided, at least the in a rare circumstance, the Seelie and Unseelie court agreed and came to the decision between the two courts to broker a peace agreement or a treaty or a truce, however, a ceasefire, however you want to put it. And a part of this deal was that they decided to, with at this time, the by this point the Fey realm had now kind of crashed into and come into contact with the prime material plane. It bounced off the abyss and came over and kind of crashed into the prime material plane. And as it left, it tore wispy pieces of planar existence between the two planes. And that's where it touched, specifically, is known as the Sylvanas Forest in the Glaustian Empire. This was now, causing some of the forests of the Fey realm to be transferred, some of the wildlife and plant life, and there was a cross-pollination between the two planes. And some of the High Elves had decided that they didn't want to be a part of the Civil War anymore, and they were moving over into the prime material plane to take up their lives in the Sylvanas Forest. And so part of this truce was that the Fey Elves decided that they're just going, if the High Elves are already going over to the prime material plane to live there, they're going to eliminate the problem completely, and they banished the Dark Elves to the prime material plane. Arachnia said yes to this wholeheartedly, because now she had an entire new world, or an entire new plane where she could spread her influence and take control. And so the Dark Elves, for the most part, were banished to the prime material plane, and they wouldn't actually have the opportunity to return to the Fey realm for many, many, many eons. Untold amounts of time. Time flows differently between the planes. It is unknown how long this actually lasted, but to the most mortal minds, it seems to be an infinite existence. Now, while they were in the Fey realm, the elves actually had a sense of true immortality. They didn't suffer the ravages of time. They would grow from childhood to their prime age, and they would never age beyond that. They would never have to worry about death or disease, or things of that nature. While on the prime material plane, they did give up true immortality. They have exceptionally long lives. In fact, most mortals, they believe that the elves, they claim that they are immortal. Um, that's only because it is not entirely unheard of to find or to hear of an elf that is, 700-800 years of age, but they do eventually die. It was also at this time another Fey creature, the gnomes. They also came over to the prime material plane during that time, but they took up a little bit of a different stance. They spread. Gnomes are very. I guess you could say curious is the best. And they didn't stay in the Sylvanas forest for the most part. They spread out all over the place, whereas the elves like to stay directly in the forests of the known world. And so you have the high elves willingly moving over to the Sylvanas forest. You have the dark elves that have now been banished to the deep recesses, or the underdeep of the known world, and things kind of settled down then in the Fey realm. On the prime material plane, Sylvanas, or I'm sorry, Sinaz decided that he was going to come over to the known world as well. He wanted to explore this new world. He didn't want to take absolute dominion, as the old gods don't really care so much about that. But the known god, or the old gods, unlike the Council of the 12 known gods, the old gods didn't have their own plane. They were intrinsic to some of these other planes. Especially the prime material plane. And so Sinaz came to the known world and decided to walk with the mortals. At this time, there was only the elves and a scattering of gnomes. And then after the creation of the other races, who knows how long this took, that's when the big event of the ending of the reckoning happened, and the celestial palace actually crashed into the prime material plane, and there was a complete reset of any existence. This would be considered, to most people, to be the beginning of recorded history, around negative 2000. So the world is very new in the current age. But this was a massive cataclysm. There was tidal waves, flooding. There was mountain ranges that were completely uplifted literally overnight. There were earthquakes. There was mass fires. There was just immense amounts of destruction that leveled most of whatever civilization was already existing on the prime material plane of the known world. And so this also allowed the Council of the 12 Elder Gods, or now known as the New Gods, or the New Faith, or the Known Gods. They were now in play from the Celestial Palace, and they decided that they wanted to explore this new world. And one of those gods was Octus. Octus is a god, as said before. He created the Shadow Realm. He is mostly known as the god of the dead. He is the gatekeeper of who goes to which end. Do they go to the Celestial Palace? Do they go to the Nine Hells? Or do they stay in the Shadow Realm? In some cases, people's souls have existed in the Shadow Realm, what they would consider infinitely. And so he saw this, and he took particular. He's also the god of magic, and he took a particular interest in the elves. He was fascinated by their long lives and their history of immortality in the Fey realm. And being a god, he kind of wanted that for the Shadow realm. He wanted that like it's a collectible. And so he came down and he walked the known earth, and he presented himself to the high elves of the Sylvanas forest, and he gifted them with the knowledge of arcane magic. And the elves really took to that. They really liked the arcane magic angle. And it became a discussion of whether or not they should worship Octus over Synaz, because Synaz, even though he is now walking apart and a part of the known world of the prime material plane, again, the old gods are fickle, and he has very little interaction. And it's not that Synaz didn't know that this discussion was happening. He fully understood that, and he watched it from afar. He wanted his children to make up their own minds. And so there was much discussion, and some of these elves, of the high elves, decided that they were going to split yet again, and they were going to go with Octus to the Shadow Realm, and this was accomplished through the unthinkable, especially for elves who have a history of immortality. In order to transfer to the Shadow Realm, these elves would have to commit a series of ritual suicides to send them into the Shadow Realm, the realm of the dead, across the veil, which is the ethereal plane that surrounds everything. And so they became the Shadow Elves. In the Shadow Realm, they had a kind of immortality, but they discovered that it was really a dismal existence. The Shadow Realm is a mirror of the Fey realm, a dark, dismal mirror of the Fey realm, and the immortality that they enjoyed in the Shadow realm was vastly different. They could die. They would catch diseases, and when they would die, they would be reincarnated as yet another Shadow Elf, but they wouldn't have a loss of any of their memories. And so it was a constant uh, reincarnation into a new body in the Shadow Realm, with all of the depressing nature of your previous lives, how you died, how many times you died. And this weighed heavily upon their souls. Eventually, some of the Shadow Elves, the majority of them, did not want to go against Octus because they didn't want to make their plight worse. But a group of the Shadow Elves decided to make a break for it. There had to be greener pastures. And so they escaped. They found a way to escape the Shadow Realm, which is no small feat. And they escaped from the edge of the Shadow Realm across the veil and found themselves in the Astral Sea. The Astral Sea, we will be getting into what makes up the Astral Sea on the next episode. But for the most part, the Astral Sea can be viewed as everything and nothing all at once. And they floated in the Astral Sea for some time until they finally discovered a floating petrified corpse of a dead god. And they settled upon this dead god and discovered that they were not the only ones to be floating in this sea of everything and nothing at the same time. There were other races and other creatures, other beings that also existed or used the Astral Sea to travel between realms. And the Astral Elves set themselves up on the Astral Bazaar, and it's called the Astral Bazaar because of its enormous marketplace, and they set up a trade network for these other intelligent species in that used the astral sea, and it's kind of a trade hub for things from all across the multiple planes of existence. If there is something that you are looking for, you can probably find it in the Astral Bazaar. Now, the Astral Elves themselves, as came to be known, were cursed yet again because they weren't a part of the Shadow Realm anymore. They had basically given up on the Fey Realm a long time ago, and so they now have, when they die, there is no immortality. They have massively long lifespans, like the High Elves. They might be 700-800 years old, whatever, but they will die, and they can be killed. And when they die, their soul now has nowhere to go. It is cast out into the astral sea, into the void, to be lost forever. And to the elves, this is kind of it brings about an existential crisis in that their existence no longer has any real meaning. And so they have to create a legacy for themselves, thus the Astral Bazaar, just the same way that humans and other mortal races have to. And so these elves, when they die, that's it for them. They don't go to heaven, they don't go to hell, they don't get reincarnated, nothing. They are cast out into the astral sea and completely lost. So that's kind of the history of the Astral Elves and how they came to the Astral Bazaar. On the next episode, we will be looking at what the Astral Sea is or isn't, and we will be taking a closer look at what is the Astral Bazaar and whether or not can gods truly die. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.